So we're talking, this series is called The Road. So the idea is like God gave kind of a roadmap for us to live by. So when you were kids, did you guys know anything about the Ten Commandments?
Do not steal.
Okay.
Do not murder. Kill.
Okay.
Is do not lie one?
Okay, do not lie. We're on a roll. Chloe's waiting in the wings.
Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain.
Okay,
Is one.
that's one.
Do not covet.
Yeah.
I would say sometimes it's hard, like, comparing yourself to, like, cars people have, or, like, how much money people have, and, like, I don't know, just trying to compare yourself to that, to what you don't have and what they have.
Yeah. I heard someone say once, just imagine if everyone in the world just obeyed the don't commit adultery commandment. Who's your favorite, your mom or your dad?
That's secret.
Plead the fifth then.
You have to say your mom. Are you kidding? She's a saint.
Yeah.
Come on. So there's a father and son, and every year it was an annual thing where they would plant a tomato garden together, and the dad was really into it, the son would help. But unfortunately, Vinny, the son, ended up in prison, not a good thing, and so the dad thought he would write Vinny in prison, tell him about this time of the year when it came around, and he writes his son, and he says, "Dear Vincent," he calls him Vincent, "I'm sad because it looks like I won't be able to plant my tomato garden this year. I'm just getting too old to be digging up the garden plot. I know if you were here, you would be happy to dig up the ground for me like the old days. Love, Papa." And a few days later, Vinny writes back to his dad in a letter, and he says, "Dear Pop, don't dig up the garden. That's where the bodies are buried. Love, Vinny." Well, at 4 a.m. the next day, believe it or not, the FBI shows up at Papa's house and digs up the whole garden, finding nothing. And a few days later, Dad receives another letter that says, "Go ahead and plant the tomatoes now. That's the best I could do under these circumstances. I love you, Vinny." There you go. So you got to honor your parents. Now, this series, we go companion with our growth guides, and we had a team that put these together, and they are just incredible. And again, we talk about them all the time, but I hope you have these because they are just so helpful just to stay connected to not only what God has to say in the Bible and in your life, but what's happening here at Daybreak. But when I was putting this together on my end, I really threw a loop into the guides because I didn't have in there a week to talk about honor your parents. And I decided to switch it up. And so if you're in the growth guides, we're a little bit different, but that's okay. But I just felt very led by God to talk about what it means to honor your parents. I think it's one of those things that it seems like, okay, yeah, if you know honor your parents, it sounds like a good thing, but there's so much behind it, and it's worth us taking our time to hear about it today. Now, this whole idea of the road is how God, again, took his people Israel. And when we talk here about the Bible every week, I want you to understand it always starts with the Bible. Like, you don't pick up the Bible and say, "What's this saying to me," first of all. That's a good question, but it's not the right question immediately. The right question at the beginning is, what is happening here with God and his people, or what's ever happening? And then what does it mean to me? And what is happening here is that God sees his people in slavery to the Egyptians, the nation of Israel, his people. And he sees them enslaved to the Egyptians, and he has a plan to get them out of there and take them to their own place. Because as slaves, they didn't have their own property. They didn't have their own rights. They didn't have their own freedom. So he takes them on this road, and we've talked about this every week so far, but it was a road of freedom. It was a road of function, and it was a road of fulfillment. That God, as he's taking his people, is taking them forward on this road to freedom. And he's showing them that living this way is a functional life. It's a life that makes sense, and it's a life that will fulfill everything that you need for your life. So I want you to look at the map of the road here. We kind of made it look our own. But let's take a look at what this looks like. So you can see right over there on the middle left there, they started in Ramesses there in Egypt. And over a period of 40 years, they took this trip through mainly the desert region. And they finally got to the promised land. This was the road that they were on. And as God begins to take his people on this road, he begins to reveal this new way of life. And so he gives them the 10 Commandments. I want you to look at the 10 Commandments on the screen here. And then I want you to see if you can remember what these are. So take a quick look. Okay, take them off the screen. You got them memorized by now, right? In case you don't have them memorized, I'm going to teach you what we taught our kids that we learned at our church when they were young. That's made it easy for us to memorize. So this is a participation thing, all right? So everybody take your hands up. You're watching on Daybreak Live. I want you to just do this. First one is God first, right? No other gods before me. The second one, now some of these are a stretch, but it's a good way to remember, all right? The second one is no idols. So just make scissors with your hand like you're cutting something, all right? Pretend you're in class and you're cutting out an idol or something. I don't know. 3. This makes a W. Watch your words. Don't take God's name in vain. Everybody got that? 4. Get together with a group of people, get in a car, and go to church. Remember the Sabbath. All right, that's the 4th one. 5, that's where we are today. Everybody do this. Honor your parents. Remember that one, right? Okay, 6. Don't murder. This is my favorite one. The next one is don't commit adultery. Mommy and daddy, everybody else. All right? Bye. Okay? Got it? All right, the next one is don't steal or you're going to get your fingers cut off. All right? That's 8. 9, don't lie because everybody else is up. This guy's lying down. Don't lie. The last one, don't covet. Don't want stuff that's not yours. So now you're going to remember it, right? Okay, good job. All right, thank you for participating. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to look at Exodus 20. And I know it's a little long, but it's worth just going back and reviewing. We learn by review. So this is the very beginning of what he speaks to the 10 Commandments to his people. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. The Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God, and on it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son nor daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. We're going to stop there just for a minute before we read the last one. That's today's. And I want to say this. Last week here at Daybreak, there was a very, very big challenge that was thrown at, and I was honestly overwhelmed by the response. That for many of you, hearing the idea of keeping the Sabbath and reorienting your life around what it means to have a day of rest and a day to be refreshed. And I just want to commend you as your pastor to say I'm proud of the response that we had. I think it was incredible, and I believe that it will change so many people's lives and families, and it will change workplaces, and it can change neighborhoods and schools as people begin to hear that we're living a radically different life. So for those of you that responded last week, just let me say how proud I am of you. And then here's the one for today. Honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Honor your father and mother. Okay? Remember, that's this one. Okay? So, when we think about this, why would God do this? One of my main questions when I have gone back to prepare for our time today is, why would God put this in a list? He's got some big ones in there. No other gods before me, that makes sense. And don't make any idols, and don't misuse God's name, and then don't murder people, and don't lie, don't steal. But honoring your mom and dad, why would God, if he has a list of the 10 most important things he wants his people to know, why would God insert obeying and honoring your parents? Well, there's a few reasons. One is it's a way to build your faith. That if you understand the message of God, if you understand that our lives are built on this idea of authority, and God knew that his people needed to understand that from a young age, they needed to know that faith and belief and honoring your parents and having faith in God and honoring him go hand in hand. So it's a way that we can build our faith when we honor our parents, because when we learn to honor our parents, then that automatically takes us to learn how to honor God. And you may go, oh, that's great for little kids, but let me say, this is great for all ages. It doesn't matter what stage of life you are. In fact, both my parents are no longer alive on this side. They're fully alive on the other side, by the way. But they're no longer here with me, but I still can learn, and my faith can build in the way that I honor my parents. Because there's a link between faith and honor. And I want to show it to you in Mark chapter 6. So in Mark chapter 6, Jesus has this really interesting interaction. So it says he left there and he went to his hometown. Jesus was traveling around. Now he's going back to his hometown. And he was with his disciples. And when the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, which was kind of their local church worship expression. And many who heard him were amazed. And where did this man get these things, they asked. These are the people that he grew up with. They're looking at Jesus and they're amazed, but not in a good way, because they said, where did he get these things? What's this wisdom that has been given to him? And what are these remarkable miracles he is performing? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son, the brother of James and Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And listen to this. They took offense at him. And Jesus said, a prophet is not without honor except in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own home. And look at what happens as a result. He could not do any miracles there except lay hands on a few sick people and heal them. And he was amazed at their lack of faith. So they didn't honor Jesus, which showed their lack of faith. See, dishonor breeds disbelief. That if you don't understand honor, there's a link between honor and faith. See, it says there that Jesus would not do any miracles there because their faith was not there, because they didn't understand the link between honor and faith. When it comes to those of us that are kids, Ephesians 6. Listen to what Ephesians 6 says to us about this. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And all the parents said, yes. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. You know, when it says here that children are to obey their parents, and then he quotes Deuteronomy 5, honor your father and mother, there's two things that we are to do as children. If you're a child here, if you have a parent, raise your hand. Everybody's hand should be raised up because you have a parent. We are supposed to do two things as kids. We're supposed to obey and honor. That's what we're supposed to do. And what happens is when we're younger, we're over here on the obedience side. We need to obey. Whatever our parents tell us, we should do. And here's what I've learned, is that when you're a kid, you may not really understand why your parents are telling you to do the crazy things they want you to do, like put on a sweater when you're not cold. You know what I mean? Or eat that broccoli that you don't want to eat. Or go to bed at a certain time. Or don't run with scissors. Or don't eat donuts on Saturday morning. No, that's terrible. You should do that. So obey, and here's how it works. Parents, if you teach your children to obey when they're at home, then when they're not at home, they'll honor you. And some of you may wonder, well, my kids really don't like me, or my kids don't honor me. And perhaps, and this isn't a guilt trip thing, but there's a cause and effect here, I believe, that maybe you didn't really teach them to obey. And I'm going to tell you, in 30 years, the work that we've done with adolescents, me and Ariana traveling the country, and we've worked with thousands upon thousands of families, not only here in West Michigan, but around the country and around the world. And I'm going to tell you, there's a common denominator that we've seen over and over and over, and that is kids need boundaries. When we see parents that just say, my kid's got it figured out, they're smart, they're more mature for their age, let me just tell you, they're not. Can I be that blunt with you? Your kids need boundaries. They need boundaries with their phone. They need boundaries with their time. They need boundaries with their relationship. They need boundaries with their discipline. And if you're not teaching them to obey now, they will not honor you later. I think there's also a spiritual principle here that especially if you're newer to the faith, and you know what's exciting is almost every week someone is giving their life to Christ here at Daybreak. So there's some of you here. Yeah, come on. You know, I've noticed today that we're a little laid back today. We're a little quiet today. Man, that's pretty good news that people are giving their lives to Jesus here on a regular basis. I'm just saying. Okay. It's still not like Detroit Lions beats Green Bay level, but we're getting there, okay? How about that? So that was a little test. That was a little test for you. You did okay. You're like, I can't cheer too loud because I didn't cheer louder for God earlier. Obey, honor. There's a spiritual principle here. I got sidetracked there for a minute, but if you're newer to the faith, you just need to obey. The stuff that we're learning about the Ten Commandments, you may go, I don't really understand it yet. Here's my advice to you, just obey. Because as you obey, you become more and more mature in your faith, and then you understand the principle of what it means to honor God with your life. But if you're newer to the faith, or if you're an immature person or a child and you go, I want to do whatever I want to do and I won't be obedient, you'll never understand the principle of honor later. So it's a way to build your faith. It makes you a stronger person of faith when you understand to honor your parents. It's also a way to build your favor. That God is giving this idea and this commandment and this principle to you because He wants you to have favor in this life. He wants your life to go good. In fact, He says that it may go well with you. You ever look at some people and you just think, man, they got everything going for them. They got great hair. They got a great family. They got a great job. They got a great this. They got a great that. Whatever like you're thinking about. And it just seems like everything's going in their favor. And you may think to yourself sometimes, why not me? Well, first of all, it's never what you think, right? Everybody's got their problems. You may look at someone and you may think they've got no problems, but they may have more than you have, and you just don't even know it. But God has favor for you in this life. He wants your life not only to be good, He wants your life to be great. But you've got to trust Him in this area, and you need to understand that when you honor your parents, that when you obey your parents, you know, in speaking with and being around students for so many years, I just go, and if you're a student here and you're listening right now, listen, the more you honor your parents, the better your life will be. The easier your life will be. If you just do what's asked of you, your life will be so much better. Now, parents, if we have kids, we know this. And we see our kids resisting us, we understand that we're not able to really give them the full experience of a great relationship because they're not listening to our wisdom and our guidance. God has favor for you. You know, and that brings up the question, Jeff, Sounds great if you got great parents. What if you don't have great parents? What does it mean to honor and obey your parents when they're not honorable people? What I know is there are some of you here that would say, I had Christian parents, but they were a terrible example of faith, and they made our family, and as a result, my life a mess. Now, some of you may have the same story, and maybe your parents aren't people of faith. Maybe you had parents that weren't Christians, and you'd have the same story. The result is the same. You know, I just, in all the work that we've done for all these years with so many families, I've just seen so much brokenness between parents and their kids. And it's heartbreaking. And sometimes we get ourselves into these messes, and maybe we don't know or we do know, and we all make mistakes, and we all are imperfect. And, you know, it's funny, as you get older, you look back at your parents and you see them as human beings. Do you know what I'm saying? You see them not as invincible or perfect. I was talking with someone here last week at Daybreak about a son and a father. Do you remember the day, guys, do you remember the day when you could take down your dad in a fight? Because every son has that kind of rite of passage. I used to wrestle with my dad. I remember getting old enough to think I can take the old man down. Boom, he just put me down in 5 seconds. And then eventually one day, I remember the day that I did it. And I felt good for about 5 seconds. But then in a weird way, I kind of felt bad because I realized I saw my dad in a completely different way. I saw the weakness that I'd never seen before. You know, if you have that experience where you've had trauma in your past related to your parents, let me say this. It's a choice that you make. You know, years ago I had a supervisor. I worked in a church, and I had a supervisor, and this guy my boss just did not like me. Now, I know you might find that impossible to believe. But he really didn't like me. And at first I thought it was just me. And then coworkers continually were coming to me and go, what does this guy have for you? What does he have against you? What'd you do? Did you spit in his coffee? What'd you do? And I'm like, man, I didn't do anything. I've only spit in his coffee like twice. I don't think he even knew. And I really never knew the reason. It was unfair. It made my life very miserable. It was all done in the name of God, which made it very complicated. But you know what I learned through that? It's a small example, but God built something in me through that. If that's your story with your parents and it's difficult and it's unfair, let God make you a better person through it. Let God build in you. Just recognize that He's building character in you. It's not fair. And you can't make it fair, and you can't erase it, and there's nothing you can do, but you can overcome it by allowing God to make you a better person through it. We have a story in my wife's family that we love to tell, and I've told it a couple years ago, but you're going to see a picture up here of a young lady named Ethel Sager. She's my wife's great-grandmother, and this picture was taken in 1907. She was 13 years old. 3 years later, she gave her life to Jesus in 1910, and that didn't go well in her household. And we have this incredible story in our family history where she gave her life to Jesus at 16 years old in 1910, and she came home, and her parents, who wanted to have nothing to do with God, literally kicked her out because she gave her life to Jesus. And the story is amazing because she goes on to become an ordained minister, one of the first women ordained ministers in America. And she married an ordained minister, and they had this incredible life of ministry. And there's been 5 generations of faith as a result of her faith. But recently, as I was thinking about this, I never thought about part of the story where Ethel goes back as life went on. She goes back to her family, and she leads every single one of them to Jesus. And that's a great story, and you go, that's awesome, and it's great to put a bow on it, right? But here's what I never thought about. She had to forgive her parents to have that outcome. Think about that. How would you feel if you were 16 years old and you did the right thing and you were punished and you were banned from your own family? And she had the grace and the faith and the courage to go back and to forgive her family. Some of you need to do the same. You go, listen, they're the parent, they're the adult, I'm the child. Step up and allow God to use you to have the grace to bring His grace and forgiveness into your family. That's the favor of God that He wants to bring to you. So it's also a way to build your future. When God here is speaking to His people, He's saying, I have a future for you. If you learn to honor me now, I'm going to take you to the promised land. And remember, we said there's a link between dishonor and disbelief and faith. And how honor produces faith. And what happened in the wilderness was they weren't listening. As they were wandering around, they weren't listening. And listen to what it says in Hebrews chapter 3. It says this, your ancestors tested and tried me, and for 40 years they saw what I did. And this is why I was angry with that generation. I said, their hearts are always going astray, and they have not known my ways. In other words, they weren't obeying me. So I declared on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest. Now I want you to go back and look at the map for a minute. As you look at this map, here's what God is saying, and here's what happened. These people didn't understand this principle of honor and obedience as they were wandering on this road. And so God said, you know what? Up to a certain age, this age and older, the disobedient generation, you don't get the gift of the promised land. I'm taking all the young people, and I'm taking Joshua and Caleb, two of my leaders who were obedient, and they're the only retirees that get to go in with all the young people into the promised land. And there's a principle here, and the principle is, if you honor God, it will go well with you and it will build your future. Your future will be so much better if you just trust God. God wants to build your future, but if you don't learn to honor your parents, you'll never get over that place into a place of blessing. You'll never get over that place into a place of favor. For some of you that don't understand this idea of honoring and obeying your parents, but most importantly, honoring and obeying God, if you don't understand that, if you hear these things about the Ten Commandments, you go, that's great, but I'm never going to do it. You'll never get to that future blessing place of God because you're holding yourself back from what God wants to do in your life. You need to honor your parents. You know, I mentioned that my parents are gone. And it was just 11 years ago that my father passed away. And I want to confess something publicly for the first time. That when I was younger, growing up, we had Christmas together in our house. And it was a really small house. And my brothers at that time, I was young, but they were all married and had kids. And so we all just stayed in our house. And as brothers, we stayed up late talking one night. Everybody else went to bed. And here's the thing about this house. This house had mice all over it. We were catching mice all the time. And my dad got a weird kick out of it. I know that sounds strange, and I want to honor him, but he just loved catching mice. He was an old farm boy, and I don't know. He just, there was something about it. And we had in our house, right under our dog dish on the wall, we had the old school fork and spoon on the wall. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. If you're older, you know what I'm talking about. Like, yeah, it looked like that, hanging on the wall, and it was right above the dog dish. And we thought this would be funny because as we're staying up late one night and Dad was in bed, and we discovered there was a mouse in the trap, we thought, well, let's take that mouse out and let's put it in the food dish of our dog, and let's take the spoon off the wall and place it on top of that mouse so that it looks like when the mouse went in there to eat, randomly the spoon just fell at that moment and fell him and killed him. We thought our dad would get a kick out of that. It's kind of weird. And so we put it all in place and we all went to bed. And I could hear my dad one by one as everybody got up, "You're not going to believe this." The next day is like, my dad's like, "You're not going to believe what happened." And he saved it. He was like, "Look at this." And he just got the greatest kick out of it. And he was so into it that at that point it was like, ooh, I don't know if today's a good day to tell him. It's Christmas, you know. So time went on, and I was around him at another time, and he brought it up again. And he was telling people, "You're not going to believe what happened." And every time I'm just feeling this guilt. And years went by, and I kept thinking randomly at different times, you know what, we never told him. And at his funeral, we're literally, me and my 3 brothers are standing by his casket, and one of us looked at the other, and I was thinking it, and they go, "You know what? We never told our dad what happened." So maybe he's watching right now. Sorry, Dad, but I confess, that's maybe not the greatest way to honor your parents. But listen to this other story. I was blessed to have great parents. They weren't perfect, but they were good to me. So this story, listen to this. For as long as I lived with my parents, they abused me physically and mentally. Depending on their whims, they would either lavish me with generosity or violently beat me in the name of discipline. I learned at an early age to fear my parents. As an only child, I was alone. Trapped in a mental and physical prison of despair, fear, and depression, I mentally retreated into myself for years as a means of survival. Despite their volatile inclinations, I still sought affection from my parents, hoping that deep inside they loved me. And sometimes I attempted to hug my mother, but she kept her arms to her side and held herself stiffly. And when I made cards for my father on birthdays or Father's Day, he would throw them away without even glancing at them. After turning 22, I informed my parents that I was leaving home. I wanted a fresh start in a place that was far away from them and the painful memories of my childhood. Since leaving 19 years ago, I have not seen them in person ever again. I tried to phone them regularly. However, their resentment, anger, and open hostility left me emotionally depleted, and I dreaded having to contact them. After a particularly heated discussion, which concluded with my mother cursing me, the depths of my gaping emotional wounds were too evident to ignore any longer. With the help of therapy, I realized that I suffered from severe depression as a result of childhood trauma. Despite making progress in therapy, the situation with my parents escalated to such an extreme that I broke off contact with them for 10 years. It wasn't the right thing to do, but I just couldn't cope with them anymore. I continued with my life. However, I was constantly depressed, and I developed an eating disorder in a desperate attempt to exert some control over my life. I started taking antidepressants, yet I remained unhappy. I was either too fat or too thin or too overworked or too poor. I formed unhealthy relationships out of an inferiority complex and an innate fear of rejection. I hated myself. I am deeply grateful for the day that Jesus pulled me out of the darkness and gave me new life. I was born again as a new creation, where I discovered the mercy and loving kindness of God, as well as His grace and peace, which transcends all understanding. And I began to believe that I was worthy because God said I was. And the aching wounds in my mind and my spirit began to heal. When I became engaged 4 years ago, I knew I had to try and reconcile with my parents. Colossians 3:13 spoke to me. Bear with one another and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. I wanted to enter my marriage in right standing with God and by forgiving my parents for their transgressions against me, as God had forgiven me for mine. It wasn't easy talking to my parents after many years of silence, but I knew that I had to make the right decision in calling them. I would like to say that since resuming communications, my parents and I have sorted out our differences. But the truth is, things are just as bad as ever. My father reacted aggressively and suddenly announced that he didn't want to talk to me ever again, that I should leave him and my mother alone, and then he hung up the phone. I have not known how to move forward since. There are times when I am sorely tempted just to let the entire matter with my parents rest. And yet I find myself in a dichotomy between the woman who strives to honor God by forgiving and putting the past behind her, and the daughter who struggles to lay aside the grievances that she has towards her childhood abusers. My Savior, for my love, wins. As a result, I try to practice forgiveness and acceptance. I pray for peace in my family and hope that one day my parents will come to a knowledge of Christ. I pray for peace in my family and hope that one day my parents will come to that knowledge. Despite my efforts, I arrive all too soon at the boundary of my own capabilities. But it is when I experience the outer limits of myself that I can best encounter God. Whereas in the past, I believe I was unable to make peace with my family. Now I've come to realize that when I am weak, God is strong, and I confess my limitations to God and give the situation over into His hands. I just believe today that some of you needed to hear that story, because it might be your story. When we talk about honoring your parents, that may be the last thing that you want to do. And maybe they don't deserve your honor. But let me say this, that if you learn honor, that it will go well for you. And you'll go far, and you'll live long. Because God didn't give this principle as part of His 10 most important things because your parents deserved it. He did it because you need it. He didn't do it to make you and force you to live in a place that was unhealthy. But He knows that if you can honor your parents, regardless of who they are, you'll be an overcomer. That's my prayer for you, church. My prayer for you is that you could overcome, good, bad, or indifferent, with your parents. God has something powerful for you. I want to pray for you today as we close. Would you stand with me here in the house? And if God's speaking to you, and you need to talk to someone, let me encourage you on your way out, if you're here in the house, to stop by the lounge. If you're with us on Daybreak Live, there's a person there that's ready to interact with you. That I just sensed today needed to be heard. And I believe God has something for you today. Father, I pray for my friends, my brothers and sisters, that they would receive this word, that they would receive the truth within it, that when we honor one another, even when we honor the dishonorable, we can be better because of it. We can be overcomers. God, for those here that this might be their story, I'm praying that you bring healing into their heart, that you'll bring grace into their life, and that their story would be one where they receive the victory, and that victory spills out into their family. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. It's been so good to be with you. God bless you. We'll see you next week.